the revolver's cold metal pressed against Serafina. Wynette's temple as she clutched her 4-year-old daughter tighter to her chest. The bank foreclosure notice crumpled in her free hand, worthless as yesterday's newspaper, while Sheriff Hutchins waited with barely concealed impatience for her to vacate the only home little Melody had ever known. "Please," Serafina whispered, her voice breaking. "Just one more week. I can find work. I can time's up, Mrs. Wynette." The sheriff's voice carried no sympathy. "You've had 3 extensions already." That's when the shadow fell across the porch steps like a mountain eclipse. Boone Greystone stood 6'9" in his worn leather boots, his massive frame filling the doorway of the modest cabin. His steel-blue eyes took in the scene with calculating precision the terrified woman. The crying child, the sheriff's drawn weapon, pointed at an innocent. "Lower your gun, Hutchins." Boone's voice rumbled like distant thunder, carrying an authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "This ain't your concern, Greystone," the sheriff replied, though his weapon wavered slightly. "Woman's got debts, and the bank wants their property." Serafina looked up at the stranger through tear-blurred eyes. She'd heard whispers about Boone Greystone, the giant rancher who owned half of Silverdale County, who'd never married despite having more wealth than most men dreamed of. They said he was cold as winter stone, interested only in his cattle. "In his land, how much does she owe?" Boone asked, his gaze never leaving the sheriff's face. $1,500, plus penalties. This might as well be $15,000 for all she's got. Without breaking eye contact, Boone reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a leather money pouch, counted out bills with methodical precision, each crisp note hitting the porch boards like a gunshot. "There's $2,000, he said simply. "Debt's paid, with extra for your trouble." Sheriff Hutchins stared at the money as if it might bite him, then holstered his weapon with obvious reluctance. "This don't change nothing long-term, Greystone. She's still got no means of support, no way to keep up payments. That's where you're wrong." Boone's eyes shifted to Serafina, studying her with the same intensity he might reserve for evaluating prime breeding stock. "You're homeless, and I'm childless," he stated simply, his words cutting through the mountain air like an axe. Through kindling, Serafina blinked, uncertain she'd heard correctly. "I'm sorry, what did you say? You need a home?" "I need ... He paused, his jaw working as if the words tasted bitter. "I need an heir, someone to leave this empire to when I'm gone." The proposition hung in the air between them, shocking in its bluntness. Sheriff Hutchins cleared his throat uncomfortably and made hasty excuses about pressing business elsewhere, leaving them alone on the porch with only little Melody's hiccuping sobs breaking the silence. "Are you suggesting marriage?" Seraphine's voice barely rose above a whisper. "I'm suggesting a business arrangement," Boone corrected. Something flickered in his eyes, loneliness perhaps, or the echo of old pain. "You and your daughter come live at my ranch. I provide for you, protect you, give you security. In return, you give me children to carry on the Greystone name." Seraphine's first instinct was to slap him for the crude suggestion. But as she looked down at Melody's tear-stained face, at the foreclosure notice still crumpled in her hand, practical desperation warred with wounded pride. "What kind of man makes such an offer to a complete stranger?" she asked. In his expression, a crack in the stone facade, the kind who spent 15 years building something meaningful only to realize he has no one to leave it to, the kind who's watched good women marry lesser men while he buried himself in work and profit margins. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of leather and sage. Honest sweat, and something indefinably masculine that made her pulse quicken, despite her circumstances. "I won't lie to you," he continued. "I'm not offering romance or pretty words. I'm offering security, respect, and a future for your daughter. In this territory, that's more than most women get." Melody stirred in her arms, looking up at the giant man with curious rather than fearful eyes. "Mama, is he going to help us?" The simple question from her daughter's lips crystallized everything. Pride was a luxury Serafina could no longer afford. "When would this ... arrangement begin?" she heard herself asking. "Today, if you're willing. Pack what you need. Leave the rest." As if summoned by his words, A wagon appeared at the end of the lane, driven by a weathered cowboy who tipped his hat respectfully in their direction. "That's Jasper. He'll help with your things." Boone's voice gentled slightly as he addressed Melody directly. "What's your name, little one?" "Melody Marie Wynette," the child replied with the gravity that only 4-year-olds can muster. "Are you really a giant?" For the first time, Boone's stern mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "Some folks think so. What do you think?" "I think you're just really, really tall," Melody decided. "Do you have horses?" "More horses than you can count," he assured her. And Serafina felt something shift inside her chest at the unexpected gentleness. In his voice, maybe, just maybe, this desperate gamble might work. The Greystone Ranch sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom, its white-painted buildings gleaming against the backdrop of purple mountains. Serafina had expected something impressive, but the reality took her breath away. A 3-story main house with wraparound porches, enormous barns, housing dozens of horses, and pastures stretching to the horizon, where hundreds of cattle grazed. Peacefully. "Sweet Jesus," she whispered, bouncing Melody on her lap as their wagon crested the final hill. Boone rode alongside, them on a massive black stallion that seemed bred specifically to carry his considerable frame. "Something wrong?" he asked, noting her expression. I had no idea." She gestured helplessly at the vast spread before them. "You're not just a rancher. You're practically royalty." "Money doesn't make a man royal," he replied curtly. But she caught the flash of something pride, perhaps. Or old hurt before. He spurred his horse ahead to announce their arrival. The ranch hands gathered as they approached the main house, a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed speculation. On their weathered faces, Serafina felt her cheeks burn under their scrutiny, knowing exactly what they were thinking. She was the desperate widow Boone Greystone had bought like a prize heifer at auction. "Everyone back to work," Boone commanded as he dismounted, his voice brooking no argument. The men scattered immediately, but she caught them stealing glances over their shoulders. Jasper helped her down from the wagon, his lined face kind, despite the awkwardness of the situation. "Don't mind the boys, ma'am," he said quietly. "They ain't used to seeing the boss with ... company." The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump Mexican woman in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked from Boone to Serafina, to little Melody, with the assessment of someone accustomed to managing complex situations. "This is Consuela," Boone said by way of introduction. "She runs the house, keeps the books, and generally makes sure I don't starve or walk around with holes in my clothes." Consuela meets Serafina Wynette and her daughter Melody. "Señora," Consuela said with a slight nod, her English accented but precise. "Welcome to Rancho Greystone. You must be tired from your journey." Something in the older woman's tone suggested. She knew exactly what kind of journey this had been, but there was no judgment in her dark eyes, only practical kindness. "Thank you," Serafina managed, suddenly aware of her threadbare dress and Melody's patched coat. "We don't have much, ... You have what matters?" Consuela interrupted gently. "Come, I show you to your rooms." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior polished wood floors. Heavy furniture that spoke of comfort rather than ostentation, and windows that framed the mountain views like living paintings. But it was the complete absence of feminine touches that struck Serafina most forcefully. No flowers, no delicate fabrics. Nothing to suggest a woman had ever lived here. Consuela led them upstairs to a spacious bedroom with an adjoining smaller room clearly intended for a child. Someone had hastily prepared both spaces fresh linens. On the beds, wildflowers in mason jars, toys that looked suspiciously new arranged on Melody's dresser. "Senator Boone, he rode to town this morning before going to your house," Consuela explained, noting Seraphine's surprise at the toys. "He wanted the little one to feel welcome." The gesture was so unexpected, so thoughtful, that Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been prepared for coldness, for the clinical efficiency of a business transaction. She hadn't expected kindness. "Where does ... where does Mr. Greystone sleep?" she asked, then immediately flushed at how the question sounded. "Master bedroom is downstairs," Consuela replied matter-of-factly. He thought you would prefer privacy while you adjust to your new circumstances. That evening, after Melody had been fed, bathed, and tucked into her new bed with a story about a princess who lived on a magic ranch, Serafina found herself in the main parlor with Boone. He'd changed from his working clothes into clean trousers and a white shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. The transformation from intimidating rancher to merely imposing man was subtle but significant. "We should discuss terms," he said without preamble, settling into a leather chair that creaked under his weight. "What you can expect." "What I expect." In return, Serafina perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. "I'm listening. We'll have complete authority over the household. Consuela will teach you the routines, introduce you to the staff, help you understand how things work. Melody will be treated as my own daughter in all ways that matter. She'll have the best education, the finest clothes, everything she needs to become a proper lady." The generosity stole her breath, and in return, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We'll marry within the month. A proper ceremony, nothing rushed or secretive. After that, he paused, studying his hands. "I expect you to share my bed and bear my children. I won't force anything, but I won't wait forever either." Heat flooded her cheeks at his bluntness, but she appreciated his honesty. "What if I can't have more children? What if something's wrong with me?" "Then we'll love the daughter you already have and make the best of what we have." His eyes met hers directly. Demanding, yes. Impatient sometimes, but not cruel. "Why me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "You could have any woman in the territory. Why choose someone desperate enough to accept such an arrangement?" For a long moment, he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual, because desperate people don't have the luxury of lying to themselves about what they want. "You need security. I need family. Everything else, ... we'll figure out as we go." From upstairs came the sound of Melody calling for water, and Serafina rose automatically to tend to her daughter. At the parlor door, she turned back. "Boone, thank you. For the toys, for being kind to her. Whatever else happens between us, I won't forget that." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of something warmer. She's an easy child to be kind to. As Serafina climbed the stairs, she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, this impossible arrangement might become something more. The wedding dress hung in Seraphine's room like a ghost of dreams she'd abandoned long ago. Pure white silk with pearl buttons and delicate lace sleeves. It was more beautiful than anything she'd ever owned, and more terrifying than facing down a rattlesnake. "You look like a princess, Mama," Melody declared from her perch on the bed, where she was carefully arranging her own new dress. The child had adapted to ranch life with the resilience of youth, following Consuela around like a devoted puppy and charming every cowboy within a 50-mile radius. "I feel like a fraud," Serafina murmured, studying her reflection in the full-length mirror Boone had ordered specially from Denver. 3 weeks of regular meals and clean mountain air had restored some color to her cheeks, but she still felt like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Consuela bustled in carrying a tray of breakfast, her dark eyes taking in Seraphine's nervous pallor with maternal concern. "Eat something, Mia. You cannot faint at your own wedding." "Maybe fainting would be easier," Serafina admitted, though she obediently nibbled at the toast. "What if I can't do this, Consuela? What if I can't be the wife he needs?" The older woman sat beside her on the bed, her weathered hands gentle. As she adjusted Seraphine's hair, "I have worked for Senor Boone for 8 years. In all that time, I have never seen him smile until your daughter made him laugh yesterday when she tried to rope a chicken." Serafina remembered the moment Melody's fierce concentration as she wielded a lasso nearly as tall as herself. Boone's startled bark of laughter when she managed to catch only her own feet. For just an instant, his stone facade had cracked, revealing something warmer underneath. "He's not the cold man people think," Consuela continued. "He is lonely, see, and he has built walls around his heart. But walls can be climbed, Mia, given time and patience." The ceremony was held in the town church, packed with curious townspeople who'd come to witness the marriage of Silverdale County's most eligible bachelor to a woman most of them had never seen before. Serafina felt their stares like physical weight as she walked down the aisle, her arm linked through Jasper's, since she had no father to give her away. But when she reached the altar and saw Boone waiting for her in his finest black suit, looking like a dark angel carved from mountain stone, everything else faded away. His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her pulse race, and when he took her hand in his massive one, she felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the leap they were taking together. "Dearly beloved Reverend Matthews," began, his voice carrying clearly through the packed church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Boone Greystone and Serafina Winnett in holy matrimony. The vows were traditional, formal, but when Boone spoke the words to have and to hold, from this day forward his voice dropped to an intimate rumble meant only for her ears. And when she promised to love and honor him, she found herself meaning it more than she'd expected. The kiss that sealed their union was brief, almost chaste, but Serafina felt the controlled power in his touch, the careful restraint of a man who knew his own strength. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the applause seemed to come from very far away. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables groaning under the weight of food contributed by neighboring families and enough whiskey to float a riverboat. Melody held court among the ranch hands, regaling them with stories of her adventures exploring the property, while Boone played the gracious host with the ease of a man born to command. But Serafina noticed how his eyes sought her out across the crowded yard, how he stayed close enough to intercept anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about their whirlwind courtship. For all his bluntness about the practical nature of their arrangement, he was protecting her reputation with the fierce determination of a man defending his most prized possession. As the sun began to set and the last guests departed, reality settled over the ranch like evening mist. They were married now, legally bound, and the night stretched ahead of them with all its implications. "I should check on Melody," Serafina said, suddenly nervous as they stood alone on the front porch. "Consuela's already gotten her ready for bed," Boone replied, his voice carefully neutral. "She's probably asleep by now." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Finally, Boone cleared his throat. "I want you to know," he said, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains, "I don't expect, that is, tonight doesn't have to be. We can take things slowly." The consideration in his voice, the obvious effort to put her at ease, touched something deep in her chest. This was a man who could have demanded his husbandly rights without question, who held all the power in their arrangement. Instead, he was offering her time, space, the luxury of choice. "Thank you," she whispered, then surprised herself by reaching out to touch his arm. "But Boone, I married you today. In the eyes of God and this community, I'm your wife. Whatever that means, wherever it leads. ... I'm ready to find out." His head turned sharply, steel blue eyes searching her face in the gathering darkness. Whatever he saw, there seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded slowly. "Then we'll figure it out together, Mrs. Greystone." The sound of her new name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. As they walked into the house together, Serafina found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, this marriage of convenience might become something far more complicated and far more precious than either of them had bargained for. The scream that shattered the pre-dawn stillness sent Boone bolting upright in bed. His hand instinctively reaching for the Colt .45 he kept on the nightstand. But the second scream, high, terrified, distinctly feminine, had him running barefoot up the stairs in nothing but his hastily grabbed trousers. He found Serafina thrashing in her bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare so vivid that tears streamed down her face, even in sleep. Her hands clawed at invisible attackers while broken words spilled from her lips pleas for mercy. Desperate bargains with creditors, the name James repeated like a prayer. Serafina. He kept his voice low and calm as he approached the bed. "Wake up. You're safe." When gentle words failed to penetrate her terror, He sat on the edge of the mattress and carefully gathered her into his arms. She fought him at first, her fist striking his bare chest with surprising strength. But gradually his steady presence and murmured reassurances broke through the nightmare's hold. Her eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, before landing on his face. "Boone, I'm here. You're safe. It was just a dream." She collapsed against his chest, her whole body shaking with the aftermath of whatever hell her sleeping mind had conjured. He held her without speaking, one massive hand stroking her tangled hair while the other rubbed soothing circles on her back. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his shoulder. "I didn't mean to wake you. I haven't had one that bad in weeks." "How long have you been having nightmares?" The question seemed to require enormous effort to answer. "Since James died. Since we lost the farm. Since... ... She pulled back to look at him, vulnerability naked in her tear-bright eyes. "Since I realized how close we came to having nothing at all." In the pale moonlight filtering through the curtains, Boone could make out the exhaustion etched in every line of her face. This wasn't the first sleepless night she'd endured, just the first one he'd witnessed. "Tell me about him," he said quietly. "About James." She tensed as if preparing to flee, but his arms tightened slightly around her, not restraining, just anchoring. "I don't talk about James. Maybe that's the problem." For a long moment, the only sound was their breathing and the distant call of a night bird. Then, as if a dam had burst, the words began to flow. "He was good," she said simply. "Not perfect. Not a saint, but genuinely good. We met when I was 16. He was the blacksmith's apprentice, all muscle and shy smiles. Everyone said I could do better, that a schoolteacher's daughter shouldn't settle for a man who worked with his hands. But you loved him. I loved him." The admission came with fresh tears. "We were happy, Boone. Poor as church mice most of the time, but happy. He wanted to give me the world, worked himself nearly to death trying to make the farm profitable. When the consumption took him," she shuddered. "He made me promise not to sell the land, said it was Melody's legacy. I tried so hard to keep that promise." The grief in her voice was still raw, still fresh enough to bleed. Boone found himself struggling with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Not jealousy, exactly, but something close to it. She loved James Winnett with the kind of pure, uncomplicated devotion that most men only dreamed of inspiring. "Do you think he would have wanted you to sacrifice everything for a patch of dirt?" Boone asked gently. "No." The word came out as a broken whisper. "James would have told me to do whatever it took to protect Melody. He would have. He would have understood about us, about this arrangement. Would he have approved?" For so long that Boone thought she might have fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice held a note of wonder. "I think he would have liked you," she said. "You're nothing alike. He was gentle where you're hard, trusting where you're suspicious. But you both have that same core of absolute integrity. Both keep your promises." Something tight in Boone's chest began to loosen. He'd been prepared for many things in this marriage: duty, obligation, even eventual affection. He hadn't been prepared for the ghost of a good man who'd loved his wife completely. "I can't be him," he said finally. "I know." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "I'm not asking you to be. I'm trying to figure out how to be married to someone else when part of my heart still belongs to a dead man." The honesty was devastating in its simplicity. Most women would have lied, would have offered pretty reassurances they didn't mean. Serafina gave him truth, even when it cut. "Time helps," he said, drawing on his own experience with loss. "The pain doesn't go away, but it changes, becomes something you can carry instead of something that carries you. Is that what happened with your family?" The question hit him like a physical blow. In the weeks since their marriage, she'd never pushed for details about his past, accepting his silence on the subject with the same grace she brought to everything else. "My parents died in a blizzard when I was 22, he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "I was supposed to be with them, but I stayed behind to tend a sick horse. Stupid pride over a $50 animal cost them their lives." "Not your fault, isn't it?" The old guilt rose like bile in his throat. "If I'd been there, maybe I could have found shelter. Could have died with them," she interrupted firmly. Boone, Survivor's guilt is a luxury you can't afford. Your parents wouldn't want you carrying that burden. The certainty in her voice, the hard-won wisdom born of her own losses, cut through 15 years of self-recrimination like a blade through rope. They held each other in the growing darkness. Two wounded souls finding unexpected comfort in shared honesty. When Serafina finally fell back asleep in his arms, her breathing deep and peaceful for the first time in weeks, Boone found himself thinking that maybe this marriage might become something neither of them had dared to hope for, something real. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning when the autumn air bit sharp enough to promise winter's approach. Boone was in the barn checking on a mare about to foal when Jasper brought it to him. The old cowboy's face grim as prairie storm clouds. "Came with the Morning Post," Jasper said, handing over the expensive envelope with its embossed legal seal. "Looks like trouble." Boone's blood chilled as he read the contents. The law firm of Whitmore, Kessler and Associates was representing the estate of James Winnett, and they were demanding custody of Melody Winnett on behalf of her paternal grandparents, claiming that Serafina was an unfit mother who had abandoned her moral obligations, entering into a hasty and financially motivated marriage. "Son of a bitch," Boone growled. Crushing the letter in his massive fist, he found Serafina in the kitchen, teaching Melody how to make biscuits. Both of them dusted with flour and giggling at some private joke. The sight of their happiness made the letter's contents feel like a personal attack on everything he'd come to value. "Melody, sweetheart," he said carefully, "why don't you go help Consuela feed the chickens? I need to talk to your mama." The child scampered off with the enthusiasm of youth, leaving them alone in the warm kitchen. Boone handed Serafina the letter without preamble, watching as the color drained from her face with each word she read. "God," she whispered, sinking into a chair as her legs gave out. "Oh God, no. Who are they?" "These grandparents." "James's parents. They live in St. Louis. Own a shipping company." Her hands shook as she set the letter on the table. "They never approved of our marriage," said James was throwing his life away on a backwoods nobody. "When he died, they wanted to take Melody then, but I fought them. I thought they'd given up." What changed? The question hung in the air like an accusation. They both knew the answer. Their marriage had given James's parents the ammunition they needed to paint Serafina as a woman of loose morals who would sell herself for security. "They have money," Serafina said dully. "Influence. Lawyers who could convince a judge that a child belongs with her proper family, rather than with a mother who married a stranger for his ranch." Boone's jaw tightened with controlled fury. "Over my dead body, you don't understand." She looked up at him with eyes full of despair. "In their world, I'm exactly what they've always said I was, a gold-digging opportunist who trapped their son and is now corrupting their granddaughter. Our marriage, the way it happened, it proves every terrible thing they ever believed about me. Then we'll prove them wrong." "How?" "By telling a judge we married for practical reasons. By admitting this whole thing was a business arrangement." She laughed bitterly. "That's exactly what they want to hear." Boone knelt beside her chair, his large hands framing her face with surprising gentleness. "Look at me, Serafina. Look at me." Reluctantly, she met his eyes. "What we have may have started as an arrangement, but it's not that anymore." "Is it?" The question demanded honesty, and she gave it to him. "No, it's not." "Then we fight. We show them what we are, what we've become. We show them a family." That afternoon, they rode to town to consult with the only lawyer in Silverdale County, a young man named Theodore Whitman, who'd recently hung out his shingle after graduating from Harvard Law School. He listened to their situation with the grave attention of someone who understood the stakes. "I won't lie to you," Whitman said finally. "Custody cases favor blood relatives, especially when those relatives have significant financial resources. But we have some advantages. You're married now, providing Melody with a stable two-parent home. Mr. Greystone's reputation in the community is beyond reproach. And most importantly, you're the child's mother." "What do we need to do?" Boone asked. "Document everything. Show the court that Melody is thriving here, that she's happy and well cared for. Get character witnesses, neighbors, townspeople, anyone who can speak to your fitness as parents." Over the following weeks, the entire community rallied around them. The reverend who'd performed their wedding ceremony wrote a glowing letter about their devotion to family and faith. The schoolteacher praised Melody's progress and obvious contentment. Even crusty old Sheriff Hutchins, who'd initially been skeptical of their hasty marriage, provided testimony about Boone's sterling character and Seraphine's dedication as a mother. But the strongest advocate for their case was Melody herself. When the judge's representative came to interview her, she spoke with the clear, uncompromised honesty of childhood about her love for her new papa, her happiness at the ranch, and her desire never to leave the only real home she'd ever known. "Papa Boone teaches me to ride horses," she told the stern-faced investigator, "and Mama sings to me when I have bad dreams. We're a real family now." Why would anyone want to break up a family? The question, delivered with 4-year-old logic, cut to the heart of the matter more effectively than any legal argument could have. As they waited for the court's decision, Boone found himself praying for the first time since his parents' death, not for victory, but for the chance to protect the family he'd never expected to love so completely. "Whatever happens," he told Serafina the night before the hearing, "we face it together." She nodded, her hand finding his in the darkness. Together. Neither of them slept that night, but they held each other through the long hours, drawing strength from the love that had grown between them like wildflowers after rain unexpected. Resilient and absolutely real. The courtroom in Denver felt like a cathedral of judgment. Its high ceilings and dark wood paneling designed to intimidate anyone seeking justice. Ahafina sat beside Boone at the defendant's table, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Across the aisle, James's parents, Richard and Victoria Winnett, sat with their team of expensive lawyers, their faces carved from the same cold marble as the courthouse steps. Victoria Winnett was everything Serafina had never been: elegant, refined, dripping with the kind of quiet wealth that spoke in whispers but commanded absolute attention. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her black dress cut from fabric that cost more than most families earned in a month. When she looked at Serafina, her pale blue eyes held nothing but contempt. "Ow. All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Fairfax." The bailiff announced Judge Fairfax was a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair, and the kind of piercing intelligence that seemed to see straight through pretense to truth. She studied the assembled parties with the cool assessment of someone who'd presided over too many custody battles to be swayed by emotion alone. "This court will now hear the matter of Winnett versus Greystone," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed courtroom. "Counselors, present your opening arguments." The Winnett family's lead attorney, a silver-haired shark named Harrison Blackwell, rose with theatrical precision. "Your Honor, this case is about what's best for an innocent child caught in the web of adult selfishness and poor judgment. The petitioners, Richard and Victoria Winnett, are the paternal grandparents of 4-year-old Melody Winnett. They seek custody of their granddaughter because her mother, Serafina Winnett, now Greystone, has demonstrated a pattern of reckless behavior that places the child at risk. He painted a picture of Serafina as a desperate woman who'd sold herself to the highest bidder, abandoning all moral principles for financial security. He spoke of the rushed marriage, the questionable circumstances, the unsavory arrangement that had brought them together. The Winnetts offer this child stability, education, and the social advantages that come with proper breeding and substantial means, Blackwell concluded. They offer her a future worthy of her father's memory. When Theodore Whitman rose to present their defense, his youthful appearance seemed almost comical next to Blackwell's polished sophistication. But his voice carried conviction born of absolute belief in his client's case. "Your Honor, this case is indeed about what's best for Melody Winnett, and what's best for any child is to remain with the mother who loves her, protects her, and has sacrificed everything to ensure her welfare. The petitioners abandoned their son when he chose love over social status. They ignored their granddaughter's existence until it became convenient to use her as a weapon against the woman they blamed for their son's choices." The testimony that followed was brutal. Victoria Winnett took the stand with icy composure, describing Serafina as a grasping opportunist who trapped my son with an unwanted pregnancy, and is now repeating the pattern with another victim. Whitman said during cross-examination. "When did you last see your granddaughter before filing this custody suit?" Victoria's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. He attempted to maintain contact, but the mother made it difficult. Difficult how? By moving to Colorado after your son's death? Or difficult because you never once offered assistance during the 2 years she struggled to keep your granddaughter fed and housed? Victoria's composure cracked slightly. We offered to take the child when James died. She refused our generosity. You offered to take the child away from her mother, Whitman corrected. Did you offer financial assistance?
Oh.
With medical bills, support of any kind that would have kept the family together? The silence stretched long enough to be damning when Serafina took the stand. Her voice shook at first, but it grew stronger as she spoke about her love for Melody. The sacrifices she'd made, the desperation that had driven her to accept Boone's proposal. She didn't try to pretty up the truth. She owned her circumstances with the dignity of someone who'd survived the worst life could offer. I married Boone Greystone because I had nowhere else to turn, she said simply. But I stayed married to him because I fell in love with a man who treats my daughter like his own blood, who gives her the security and love she deserves. We may not have married for conventional reasons, but we've become a real family. It was Boone's testimony that shifted the courtroom's atmosphere. The giant rancher spoke with quiet authority about finding purpose in fatherhood, about watching Melody bloom in the mountain air, about building something lasting for the next generation. Melody calls me Papa, he said, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. Not because I demanded it, but because that's how she sees me. She's not my blood, but she's my daughter in every way that matters. I'll be damned if I'll let anyone take her away from the only home she's ever truly known.
Ow.
A moment came when Melody herself was questioned in the judge's chambers. Through the court reporter's transcript, read aloud to the assembled parties. Her childish voice rang with absolute clarity about her happiness at the ranch, her love for both her parents, and her confusion about why anyone would want to separate her from them. Judge Lady, she'd apparently said, do you have a mama and papa who love you? Then why would you want to take mine away? As the final arguments concluded, Judge Fairfax called for a recess to consider her decision. The waiting was agony hours that stretched like years while the fate of their family hung in the balance. When court reconvened that afternoon, the judge's expression was unreadable. This case has required me to weigh the legal rights of blood relatives against the best interests of the child in question, she began. While the petitioners can certainly provide material advantages, this court finds that Melody Wynette is thriving in her current environment. The evidence shows a child who is loved, protected, and genuinely happy. Seraphine's hand found Boone's under the table, their fingers interlacing with desperate hope. Furthermore, Judge Fairfax continued, the circumstances surrounding the defendant's marriage, while unconventional, do not constitute grounds for removing a child from her mother's care. The court finds that Mr. and Mrs. Greystone have created a stable, loving home for Melody Wynette. Victoria Wynette's face went ashen, while her husband's jaw worked with barely controlled fury. Therefore, this court denies the petition for custody. Transfer Melody. Wynette will remain with her mother and stepfather, with the recommendation that the petitioners seek reasonable visitation rights through proper legal channels. The gavel's fall echoed like thunder, marking not just a legal victory, but the official recognition of what they'd all known in their hearts. They were a family, forged in desperation but tempered by love into something unbreakable as they left the courthouse. Boone swept Melody into his arms, while Serafina leaned against his free side, tears of relief streaming down her face. They'd won more than a custody battle. They'd won the right to love each other without fear, to build their future without looking over their shoulders. Papa Boone, Melody said, wrapping her small arms around his neck. Can we go home now? Little one, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. We can go home. 5 years later, the Greystone Ranch had become the heart of Silverdale County's growing prosperity. What had once been a successful cattle operation had expanded into a small empire breeding horses that were sought after from California to Texas, running the largest beef operation in 3 territories and providing employment for nearly half the county's residents. But the real transformation wasn't in the business ledgers or the expanding boundaries. It was in the man himself. Boone stood on the front porch in the golden light of early morning, watching his 9-year-old daughter attempt to break a particularly stubborn young mare under Jasper's patient guidance. Melody had inherited her father's determination and her mother's grace, creating a combination that could charm rattlesnakes and convince mountains to move. "She's going to be trouble when she grows up," Serafina said, joining him with a cup of coffee and the easy smile that still made his heart skip after 5 years of marriage. "She's trouble now," Boone replied, though his voice held nothing but pride. "Yesterday I found her trying to teach the new foal to fetch like a dog, and did it work?" "Of course it worked. Everything works for that girl." Serafina laughed, the sound as bright and warming as morning sunshine. At 31, she'd grown into her role as the rancher's wife with the same determination she brought to everything else. She managed the household with effortless efficiency. It started a school for the ranch children and neighboring families, and had become the unofficial diplomat for settling disputes between the various spreads in the area. But most importantly, she'd become the anchor that kept Boone grounded in what truly mattered. "The Hendersons are coming for dinner tonight," she reminded him, along with the new circuit judge and his wife. "You promised to be civilized." "I'm always civilized." "You threatened to horsewhip the last government official who suggested we needed more oversight of our operations." "That wasn't a threat, that was a promise." He slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her against his side with the casual possessiveness of a man completely secure in his wife's affections. Besides, he was an idiot who'd never seen a cow that wasn't already cut into steaks. The comfortable banter was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar wagon, Theodore Whitman, now the most successful lawyer in the territory, come to deliver news that would change everything once again. "Boone, Serafina," he called as he climbed down from his buggy, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued. "Hey, I have some news from Washington." They gathered in the parlor, the same room where they'd first discussed the terms of their arrangement so many years ago. But everything had changed since then. The room now showed evidence of Seraphine's touch and fresh flowers and comfortable cushions, family photographs on the mantel, and the general warmth that came from a house filled with love. Dorados. "Been granted statehood," Whitman announced without preamble. "We're officially the 38th state as of this morning." The news should have been cause for celebration, but Whitman's expression suggested complications. "There's more," he continued. "The new state government is being formed, and there's been talk about the governor's cabinet. Boone, they want to offer you the position of Secretary of Agriculture." Serafina felt the world tilt slightly. The appointment would mean prestige, influence, the chance to shape policy for the entire state. It would also mean leaving the ranch, moving to Denver, entering a world of politics and social maneuvering that felt as foreign as the moon. What would that involve? Boone asked carefully. Moving to the capital, managing agricultural policy for the entire state, working with federal officials on land use and water rights. It's a position that could influence the future of ranching throughout the West. The offer hung in the air. Between them, heavy with possibility and complication. This was the kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, the chance to move beyond their small corner of the world and make a real difference on a larger stage. But it was also a threat to everything they'd built together. "I need time to think about this," Boone said finally. That evening, after their dinner guests had departed and Melody had been tucked into bed with a story about a brave princess who tamed wild horses, Boone and Serafina walked to their favorite spot by Silver Creek. The water chuckled over smooth stones, and somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called to its mate. "You should take it," Serafina said quietly. "Should I?"